Good evening from Washington. I'm Larry O'Connor, and we spent a lot of time yesterday unpacking the John Durham testimony before the Judiciary Committee, and we're going to do so coming up in a bit. We've got three different congressmen to reflect on that and the Hunter Biden plea deal, what we learned today from the IRS whistleblower. That's all coming up. But I want to revisit a little bit of Mr. Durham's report because there was one moment that really deserves some reflection. Watch.
The Steele dossier was entered in the congressional record. Was it true?
I'm sorry, the Steele dossier?
Steele dossier was entered into our congressional record. Was it true?
There is not a single substantive piece of information in the dossier that has ever been corroborated by the FBI or, to my knowledge, anyone else.
This should lead every single cable news show for the next month, 24/7. You know, as much as those cable news channels covered the Steele dossier several years ago. Remember, all the walls are closing in on Donald Trump stuff and the slandering of good people's names, all based on the information in the Steele dossier that was never, ever confirmed, ever. Now, normally we would have KT McFarland on this program, the Deputy National Security Advisor, to give us her insight into foreign affairs, national security, the very real threats from China and Russia. But right now, I want KT McFarland to respond to this because in your book, KT, Revolution, Trump, Washington, and We the People, you detail exactly what kind of hell you went through because of that damn Steele dossier.
Yeah, and the tragedy is, you know, the FBI, the weaponized FBI and the Mueller investigation, they all knew that the Russia thing was a fraud. And yet they pretended and they acted as if, oh, well, Russian collusion, Trump would never have won without the collusion. Now we're going to prove the collusion. And so particularly the Mueller investigation with subpoenas and everything else, they could go after not just President Trump, but they went after a whole lot of people. And they knew that it was a fraud. They knew it was a lie. They knew you hadn't committed a crime, but they went after you anyway, in my case, a lot. And although, and here's how it was presented. They never wrote it down, but with a wink and a nod. They basically said, well, if you plead guilty to something, we'll figure out what later, then we're going to let you off. Or if you implicate someone else, presumably President Trump, then we're going to go easy on you. But if you don't, then we are going to continue to subpoena and persecute and prosecute you. Yeah. And the reason it's so effective, and the reason so many people over time have said, okay, well, I admit to perjury or to this or that, is that they bankrupt you. Mm-hmm. So they have all of the resources. They spend millions and millions of dollars. You, as someone who is targeted by them or subpoenaed by them, you have to hire your own attorney. And if you don't have an attorney, I initially said, what do I need a lawyer for? I didn't do anything wrong. They then don't let you even have access to your own documents, your own history, your own, your own devices, your own calendar, your own phone log. And then they come after you and they know that click, click, click. It's like the meter on a taxi cab. It can go $500,000, $1 million, and you have to pay. You have to mortgage your house. You have to give up your child's, college fund. You have to give up your retirement fund. And that's how they punish you. And that's what nobody talks about. It's all about follow the money. Let's put these people in financial jeopardy, and then we're going to get them to confess to all sorts of stuff that we know they didn't commit, and they know they didn't commit, but they'll do it just so that they don't go bankrupt. And then the other thing that's really even worse is after the whole Mueller investigation, the Mueller investigation finds there's nothing there, the Durham report said there was nothing there. If you try to go to the Justice Department and say, could I please be reimbursed for this fraudulent persecution of me? No. Even though you never were charged with a crime, no, you really don't fit our standards. So, and then offline, when nobody's listening, a whistleblower or a couple people told my lawyer, well, Republicans never get reimbursed.
Unbelievable. And it's also, by the way, this is trivial compared to what you went through personally and what the Justice Department has done here, but there's also this suggestion that anyone who does work for the Trump administration is dirty in some way, and it's to intimidate other good people from joining the administration, from working in the White House, from actually bringing their skills to the government. Even, they would love to. You were in a position where you could as Deputy National Security Advisor, but I know people personally who said, I'd love to work for the Trump White House, but there's no way I'm going anywhere near it because of what they're doing.
Because of the persecution of the intelligence community and the Justice Department. Yeah, it's the weaponization of our intelligence agencies. I try to take a step back and from the personal, and okay, so let's look at this systemically. What happened in 2016? Hillary Clinton, the Democrats, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they went after Donald Trump to have him lose the 2016 election. And then when they were unsuccessful, Then they decided, okay, we're now going to absolutely sabotage this administration. So up comes Steele dossier, the Mueller investigation, and they tried to not only politically assassinate President Trump, but everybody around him. And they were never held to account.
Yeah.
Then go fast forward to 2020. Well, this time the CIA got in the act. And that was 51 former senior officials of the Central Intelligence Agency who said, well, that Hunter Biden laptop, complete Russian disinformation. And that probably made a big effect on the 2020 election. So they were successful with that. But again, nobody ever held accountable. So I fast forward and say, what's going to happen in 2024?
Yeah.
Not only are they going to go ahead and do it again, I think the IRS will probably get involved this time around. They'll do it again. They'll think we're never going to be held accountable. But this time, they've got a different incentive. And that's because of the Durham report, because of all the congressional investigations, we now have bank records, we have cold hard facts, we have irrefutable evidence that there were a lot of people in the Justice Department, even including active duty CIA people, who were trying to throw the election of 16 and 20. They now have an incentive to cover their tracks,
Right.
because they've got to win in 24. Because what happens if a Republican president, a Republican attorney general said, hey, wait a minute, I've got a lot of evidence. I can go after these people. I can prosecute them. They'll have to pay for their own legal defense.
Yeah.
So I think that you'll see a double down on the part of the Washington establishment,
Sure.
the propaganda media, and all the same people that we've seen again and again and again to really double down their efforts for 24.
Cover their tracks. Yeah. Katie, since we do have you, let's talk. There is a national security angle to this as well. One hallmark of American diplomacy and national security efforts, really since the end of the Second World War, was to be an example, a shining example to other developing nations around the world. And we could use our integrity and our prestige to say, no, you guys can't be so corrupt. You can't be doing that. We're not going to play ball with you if you have dirty elections and you use the law the way you do as a weapon. That when you see this story develop, and also what just happened with Hunter Biden getting away with corruption, have we lost that moral standing? Will we be able to get it back? How can we lecture Venezuela anymore?
Well, if you're somebody who's thinking of offering a bribe, you're thinking, oh, it's a pretty effective thing. The Hunter Biden, he may have a lot of, bribes we could give him. But here's how it works out in the conduct of foreign policy. So I was in Beijing right before COVID, so in the fall of 2019. And I met with a number of very senior, the most senior, except for the president, Chinese officials. And I said that, you don't like the Trump administration because you think Trump is too tough on China, the trade war, et cetera. I said, but understand that the American people are pretty unified now, Republicans and Democrats, that whoever is the next president is going to continue the tough China policies. And then I was told by the Chinese senior officials, well, there's no way Donald Trump is going to get reelected. We know it's going to be Joe Biden. I said, don't be so sure. Then fast forward to what was going on at the same time in Iran. John Kerry, former Secretary of State in the Obama administration, who negotiated the very flawed Iran nuclear deal, he was busy during that same period of the Trump administration of going to Iran and saying, don't settle with the Trump administration.
Right.
He won't be, he'll be impeached. He certainly won't be reelected. You'll have us to deal with. So just bide your time. So they were actively going to other countries and undercutting the ability of a sitting president of the United States to conduct diplomacy and to hold our adversaries, because they were so corrupt that they were willing to throw America under the bus for their own political self-interest.
Reminds me of a thing called the Logan Act, which I think was thrown out there during all of this stuff in the Trump administration. I'll have to look into that. Katie McFarland, you kept your integrity and your poise and your good humor through it all, and we love talking with you. Thanks for joining us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. Earlier today on Capitol Hill, the House Ways and Means Committee made public some information that they've known about for several weeks. We sort of told you about it based on the reporting of John Salem. That has to do with these IRS whistleblowers saying that their investigation into Hunter Biden's tax evasion, tax fraud, was being overlooked, held up, dismissed by the Justice Department. Now, earlier this week, that same Hunter Biden got a sweetheart deal, a slap on the wrist plea bargain. And they knew that more information was coming out about the holdup at the Justice Department today. So were those two things linked? And what did we learn today? Well, let's bring in a member of that House Ways and Means Committee and the chairman of the Republican Study Committee, Congressman Kevin Hern of Oklahoma. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you this morning.
First, before we get into the details of what we learned today from the whistleblowers, can I ask you to, speculate a little? That plea bargain came out of nowhere, and it is an abomination of justice for the president's son to get off with 2 misdemeanors for tax evasion for what they claim to be about $1 million worth of misreported taxes. Do you think they rushed that plea through knowing that your committee was going to release this information today?
Well, certainly their attorneys, his attorney, were apprised of what we were going to be talking about today. And there's no question after seeing all of the testimony from Whistleblower 1 and 2 and the testimony that we saw today, there's no question that that's what they did. They tried to get ahead of this, to say there's no there, that when he discovered he hadn't paid it, hadn't recognized the income, some $8 million in income that he had received, and the taxes to be paid on that, he knew that he was caught, and so he had to plead to something. But what's interesting about this, I think the bottom line, what every American fears most is this corruption at the highest level. IRS leadership knew it. Department of Justice knew it. Area courts knew it. When you see what the attorney Wise did in trying to file these charges in Washington D.C. court and couldn't get it done, very devastating information put forth today in Ways and Means hearing.
So the plea deal that we've seen so far, we haven't seen the full details of the plea deal, but what we do know about the plea deal right now is that $1.2 million was cited. You just cited $8 million. In what realm of reality is that a misdemeanor, or did these whistleblowers actually plan on recommending felony charges?
Well, they went out. They recommended several felony charges. They actually have been investigating all the way back to 2014. Statute of limitations ran out on some of this, so the monies that you're looking at specifically are 2017, 2018. But think about what this means for the average person out there across America and those who want to do bad things and not pay taxes. Basically, what Hunter Biden has just done is saying, I'm not going to pay my taxes. First of all, I'm not going to recognize the income that I received. I'm not going to pay my taxes. And when it looks like I'm going to get caught, I'm just going to say, oh, I'm sorry, I'll just write a check and everything will be great. And that's what happened in this case. Can you imagine if that were to happen with a business owner across America or anybody else? If, one of our large CEOs, corporation CEOs, based on what the Democrats have been doing, if they said, oh, I forgot to pay my taxes, 4 or 5 years ago, I'm just going to write a check now and everything will be okay. I don't think so.
You said that some of these charges, the statute of limitations has run out. If they've been investigating this for so long, is it the investigators at the IRS? Is it their fault for the statute of limitations running out? Or I would think that career attorneys at the Justice Department and investigators, they know what the statute of limitations is. What took them so long?
Well, again, that's why we had the first whistleblower come forward, and then as we wanted to corroborate that, the attorneys on staff wanted to corroborate whistleblower 1. They brought in a second whistleblower to get access to make sure that things lined up. Both whistleblowers were interviewed independently for about 7 hours each by staff sitting in the room, by attorneys on both the Republican staff and also Democrat staff. And I think it's really important to be noted, the Democrats, all they could argue today in the Ways and Means hearing was process. It was all about process. Yet when I questioned them and pointed out that I was not an attorney, but I did have a question about, did any of the Democrat attorneys ask to have more witnesses brought forth? And the answer was no. Repeatedly no. They were satisfied with whistleblower 1 and 2's testimony that it was corroborated and that it was credible. And so when you have this brought forward and the damning information, my guess is they didn't want any more corroborating information. They wanted to try to discredit 2 whistleblowers instead of having repeated witnesses coming forward.
Congressman Hern, when you learn of this story, within 24 hours of hearing Mr. Durham's testimony about his report and what we've learned now about the Justice Department, the FBI, and, oh, by the way, the Obama White House and what they knew about the Russian collusion hoax, when you take all of that into account, and now we're told by the Justice Department and the White House, there's no coordination here, and we didn't intrude, and we didn't try to get in the way of any kind of real charges coming against President's son, our hands are clean. We're asked to trust them. Is that good enough? I mean, based on what we've learned from Mr. Durham, can we trust them that this is all on the up and up, this Hunter Biden deal?
Well, I think it's important for Republicans in the House, and I would argue a bipartisan approach to restoring trust in our federal government. When the American people lose trust in the federal government, which I suspect has been eroding very rapidly, we all have a lot of work to do. And I think that's really the question on the table is where do we go from here? The reason that this was brought forward to Ways and Means first is because Ways and Means oversight has jurisdiction over the IRS, and that's why the IRS came the way it did. Now this will be released to Jim Jordan and Jamie Comer on judiciary and oversight, respectively. And this is where they're really going to get after doing their work. And that's why it's important for all of us on the Republican conference to let this process play out, to go through the hearings, to have people come forward, additional whistleblowers, additional witnesses, to corroborate and show how big this corruption at the highest level really is. And it's our job. It's a job of both Democrats and Republicans working together to clean up this administrative branch that's going on right now that thinks that they're too big to be held accountable.
I think one of the problems, I agree with you. I'd like to agree with you, and I would love to see that happen. But I think, Congressman Hern, from where I was sitting, based on my observation, I don't think the Democrats agree with you. Based on their behavior yesterday in the Judiciary Committee and based on what you're telling me today happened in the Ways and Means Committee, I don't think they actually see that there's a problem here because it's not their guys who are being targeted by this system.
This is different in a sense that the whistleblowers came forward with this information and walked through the process. One of them, whistleblower one, at the high level of IRS agents who had walked through this process. The irony of all of this is this wasn't a primary target. Hunter Biden was not the primary target of this investigation. It was actually in a parallel case that was going on, that this senior level IRS agent found a nexus of connection and started investigating that route, put another IRS agent, which became whistleblower 2, one that discovered what they had seen, which was a lot of unreported income, certainly unreported taxes, brought that forward to their superiors, went through the process of the whistleblower actions that they're supposed to do, took it to the highest level of the IRS and the DOJ, and were turned away time and time again, and they knew that was wrong. And so the next step was to do what they did, which is call the staff at Ways and Means and said, we have something we want to report.
Yeah, so add to that story, Congressman, where I'm also learning here is that the whistleblower in question was passed over for promotion and was removed from the Hunter Biden investigation after they blew the whistle. Does that look like obstruction to you?
Well, it does, and that the retaliation that the IRS leadership, the corrupt leadership of the IRS has done to these two whistleblowers is really sad. We depend on whistleblowers. They've been very well protected over the years. I'm sure the other side doesn't like what's being said. That's why in this case, unlike the case we had last year with President Trump's tax returns, where there were no minority Republican attorneys in the room, here we had 4 Republican attorneys and 3 Democrat attorneys listening to this 7 hours of testimony for each of the whistleblowers. They had every opportunity to ask other questions. The whistleblowers were given the opportunity and their attorneys to read back through all of the testimony to make sure if there was anything to be technically corrected or added, and that was done and certified via their attorneys. And again, both Democrat and Republican attorneys for the Ways and Means Committee were present at all times and had the ability to push back. The Democrat attorneys did not push back. And today, all the argument that the Democrats had was, why weren't more witnesses called forward? And my question was, why don't you ask your attorneys why they didn't call any more
They didn't
witnesses?
ask any, yeah. We got to leave it there. Congressman Hern, Ways and Means Committee and also Chairman of the Republican Study Committee. Thanks for joining us, and thanks for breaking that news with us. There's more to come on O'Connor Tonight. We continue our Congress Palooza tonight as we analyze yesterday's Durham testimony. A couple of things continue to stick out to us, especially this exchange. It started with a question from Congressman Kevin Kiley about Adam Schiff's preposterous statements during the Russian collusion investigation. Watch.
In 2017-2018 made statements such as, the Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help, and that is pretty damning. He also said there's clear evidence on the issue of collusion. He said, I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight. Mr. Durham,
Will the gentleman yield?
are those statements supported by the conclusions of the Mueller
Will the
report?
gentleman yield?
No. Mr. Durham, are those statements supported by the Mueller report?
I don't believe so.
Yeah, hell no, I won't yield. I'm Kevin Kiley. Well, let's bring in the unyielding Congressman Kiley, a freshman who's making some noise up there on Capitol Hill. Thanks for joining us, Congressman.
Yeah, of course. Great to be with you, as always.
You went on to bring up some statements that Congressman Nadler, the ranking member, had made, Congressman, various Democrats who, for 5 years, they were all over my television telling me that the walls were closing in on President Trump. None of them were supported by the facts and by the actual investigation that Mr. Durham said. What conclusion can you reach here? Were your new colleagues here lying at the time? Were they misled?
Well, I didn't, pick those people at random, and those very individuals, Mr. Liu, Mr. Swalwell, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Nadler, they were there at the Durham hearing yesterday, and they were still at it. They were attacking Durham. They called his investigation unethical. Ted Luce called him a partisan hack, all in an attempt to somehow, continue this false narrative, which has been discredited on so many levels. This narrative of Russian collusion. I mean, it's been discredited by Mueller, it's been discredited by Durham, and yet they continue to somehow, Adam Schiff yesterday, they kept yielding him time. So he had 6 rounds of questioning or something like that. Yeah. He's still trying to find this elusive phantom collusion, hoping that, 5 years and however many investigations and then 5 rounds of questioning later, that'll be the moment that he finally stumbles upon it. Yeah. So it is, that's why I read back those statements, is that it was very clear why they were attacking Durham, is that these are the individuals who used their positions of power, their positions in the public eye, to propagate this false narrative that caused so much damage to our country. Well,
and Congressman, those same congressmen get continuously invited onto cable news. Adam Schiff is running for Senate in your state right now. You would think that the journalists, the reporters who care about the truth, or so they tell us, they would do exactly what you did. Hey, Congressman Schiff, before we talk about your run for Senate, when we had you on a few years ago, you said these things and we know it's a lie now. Can you explain that? But they don't.
That's right. There hasn't been the level of accountability that's needed, which is why, by the way, the Durham report was commissioned in the first place, is that we had this, unprecedented, really, sequence of events where you had the administration, the prior administration spying on a presidential campaign. And then you had the Mueller investigation, which cast a cloud over the Trump administration for a long time. We had a midterm election in 2018 with that cloud hanging over the administration. And so the Durham report was saying, how did this happen? And the answer is that there was a political origin to it all. There was bias within the FBI among certain people and DOJ. There was a reliance on information provided by political opponents of the president. There was, and then they used this to create an investigation, which then became this cudgel to continue to hit the president with and to try to stall his agenda. And so that's what we mean by the weaponization of the federal government.
Right.
Is that you had a political origin to the investigation, and the investigation itself was used for political purposes.
So, Congressman, your colleague Matt Gaetz, he sort of stood out yesterday by actually challenging Mr. Durham. He compared his investigation to the Washington Generals, the fake team that would play against the Harlem Globetrotters. Their real job was to make it look like they were trying to win the game, but they weren't really. They were in on it. Most Americans are looking at this, or at least a lot of Americans are looking at this, Congressman. They're seeing, as you just said, that the Justice Department and the FBI were used as a political weapon for one political party against the other. And it's true, the facts are there, and yet no repercussions. I mean, isn't this stuff against the law? And if it is, why can't we see some justice?
Well, I know that there are some who wish that the special counsel had gone further. That wish that others' prosecutions had been brought, or perhaps other people had been interviewed or subpoenaed. And I think that there is certainly room for reasonable people to disagree and for criticism in that respect. But the fact is, what we have, and just looking within the 4 corners of the report, is truly disturbing. In fact, Special Counsel Durham called it sobering, what he discovered. And so when we talk about accountability, at the end of the day, the real accountability that's needed is reforms to the way that our institutions work and removal from positions of power of those political figures who were responsible for this happening in the first place.
What's the next step here? I mean, I think it was great that Chairman Jordan had this hearing. It went on much longer than it was originally scheduled. I think Mr. Durham is a pretty impressive figure. He had a grasp of the facts of this case that, boy, certainly Robert Mueller's testimony after his special counsel investigation pales in comparison to Mr. Durham's ability. Does it end here?
Well, no, of course not, because Mr. Durham himself recognized the need for reform, and so that's now our purview as the Judiciary Committee, is to look at how this was allowed to happen, how we had people in positions of authority in our law enforcement agencies who like Schruck, who Agent Schruck, Special Agent Schruck, who manifested overt political bias, and how our systems failed to appropriately insulate investigations from that sort of bias, how it is that we allowed an American citizen to be spied on based on false allegations. So all of that is going to be what we're looking at as a committee here over the course of the coming months.
If I could ask you, Congressman Kiley, as you've been here in D.C. for about 6 months, so this doesn't pertain directly to you. I do think you have a bright political future. But there is an open Senate seat coming up in your state. As I mentioned, Congressman Schiff and a couple of other Democrats in the House are running for that Senate seat. So far, none of your colleagues from the Republican side of the equation in California have announced that they might run. And there's some pretty good Republicans. You got Tom McClintock, you got Darrell Issa, you got Kevin McCarthy. Do you think that one of your colleagues needs to step up and announce their candidacy? Because I know California is California, but boy, oh boy, if Adam Schiff ends up as the nominee or Barbara Lee, I think that there's a real chance for a Republican to make a case.
Well, sure, we need to have a strong nominee, no question about that. And I've heard some names thrown about of people who are considering stepping up.
Issa could fund it himself, let's face it. I mean, he's got that car alarm money. Let's go.
Sure, and I think we have a number of people in our delegation who would do great in that role. But the reality is that there's 12 of us Republicans from California, and it's incredibly important that we keep those 12 seats because the majority is in many ways going to run through California and New York, perhaps. And so there would be some cost to someone giving up their seat in the House in order to pursue some other office.
Oh, I see. So who do you think will emerge? Do you think that it might be maybe a self-funded? We keep seeing these Californians who have a big bankroll and they think that they can run statewide. It doesn't always work out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard some names. There's a former baseball player for the Dodgers who's been talking about it. So we'll see what happens. I do hope, and I'm confident that we'll get someone on the ballot who stands up for Republican principles and who hopefully voters can rally around.
I heard somebody say that Schwarzenegger might run, and I asked which party.
Yeah, I haven't heard that.
All right, good. All right, well, we'll leave it there. Congressman Kevin, thank you for your great work on the Judiciary Committee. This is a very exciting time for you to be there, and I'm glad your voice is being heard. And thanks for joining us tonight.
You bet. Thanks for having me.
It's Congressman Kevin Kiley from California. Senator Schwarzenegger. He can't run for president because he wasn't born here, but he could be senator if he wanted. He's not doing anything else. Doing a Netflix documentary. Come on, step up, Arnold, and be a Republican, a real Republican. There's more to come here on O'Connor tonight. Keep it here. You're watching the Salem News Channel. Yesterday, history was made on the House floor as for the 25th time in the history of our nation, a sitting congressman was censured by his colleagues, and it was Adam Schiff, and that made it really, really awesome. The Democrats who defended him, though, well, that's actually kind of depressing. Take a look.
Today, we're voting on a joke of a measure to censure Adam Schiff, a true public servant and patriot. I urge a strong no against this resolution targeting a true American hero.
What I do know, Mr. Speaker, is that Adam Schiff defended the U.S. Constitution. He led an impartial investigation, which followed the facts, which led to the first of 2 impeachments of a former president.
And he held the ethically and legally challenged former president accountable. But what really gnaws on the majority, what really bothers them, is that Mr. Schiff was way better than anybody on their team at debate, at leadership, at messaging, at legal knowledge. He kicked their ass. He was better, he was more effective, and that still bothers them.
Mr. Chairman, I could go point by point and prove that the resolution is false, but time is short. I'll just say Adam tells the truth.
This is political theater by the author who clearly was not here to distract from Donald Trump's history of transgressions and now indictments. It's also an attempt to punish Congressman Adam Schiff for effectively holding Trump to account. Congressman Schiff protected us from fascism at home and abroad.
Today, I wear this partisan vote as a badge of honor, knowing that I have lived my oath, knowing that I have done my duty to hold a dangerous and out-of-control president accountable, and knowing that I would do so again in a heartbeat.
Adam tells the truth. Whew, Zoe Lofgren, man. I mean, the guy literally read the Steele dossier into the congressional record when he was on the Intel Committee. Congressman Pat Fallon was there to watch it all. He's on the Oversight and Accountability Committee out of Texas. Congressman, thanks for joining us.
Sure, no, thanks for having me on.
What do you make of this disparate view of the truth and what's appropriate for a congressman to conduct themselves? This isn't about Schiff opposing Donald Trump. It's not about Schiff impeaching Donald Trump. It's about Schiff outright lying to the American people and using his power and influence on the Intel Committee to perpetuate that lie.
Larry, they said it was an impartial investigation. This is the furthest thing from it. I mean, it was laughable. It was actually, I was laughing and it's sad at the same time. And then the reaction of the Democrats after he was censured was disgusting. There was just no respect for the chamber or the institution. They started chanting like, little 1968 hippies.
Yeah.
Shame, shame, screaming at the top of their lungs. This is the United States House of Representatives. Have some decorum, but they don't care as long if it's something that they agree with. It has to be the truth. They had Trump derangement syndrome was in full effect yesterday on the House floor.
Yeah, and that chant of shame, shame may resonate a little bit more if they actually displayed any sense of shame. But yes, they clearly don't. But Congressman, your committee is about accountability, and sure, this is kind of a big deal, but really it isn't. I mean, Schiff is fundraising off of this. In California, this might even help his campaign for Senate.
No, he might get elected because of it, because it is so partisan, and that's what you get when you have incredibly safe Democratic districts. They can do and say whatever they want, so long as it appeals to the emotion of the left. Doesn't have to follow any facts, because we know the facts are, if you truly are impartial, you know that the Russian collusion was a complete hoax. Yeah. The Steele dossier was a fiction, paid for by Hillary Clinton, $175,000 from her, and the rest, about over $800,000, from the Democratic National Committee, totaling $1,065,000, and there wasn't a kernel of truth in it. It was purely a political hit job.
And we certainly saw that almost simultaneously as Mr. Durham was testifying before the Judiciary Committee while this vote happened right afterwards. So what's next? The American people want to know what's next as they see this. Your committee now, by the way, earlier today was handed information from the Ways and Means Committee with regard to the IRS whistleblower showing that the Justice Department dragged their feet on the Hunter Biden investigation. That looks like obstruction of justice. Your chairman, Mr. Comer, warned the Justice Department not to enter a plea because they had more information coming out. What are you guys going to do?
Well, if it weren't for us having the majority, the Republicans having the majority in the Oversight Committee, we would have never found any of this out.
Absolutely.
We knew, Larry, before we were in the majority, that there was at least $1 million that had been funneled from foreign nationals into the pockets of the Biden family syndicate. Now we know for sure it was $10 million, most likely up to $50 million. We wouldn't have known that if we didn't have subpoena power and if we didn't have the authority to hold Director Wray in contempt of Congress. That's why. So they've been cooperating very begrudgingly. And what about the suspicious activity reports? That's something that Congress always had access to until last Congress, when we found out that there were 150 plus SARs filed because of the Biden family banking activity. But we were denied access for 2 years until we had the majority.
Right.
So this truly, it smells of it smacks of a two-tier justice system, which again is incredibly dangerous and it's very chilling.
It is a two-tier justice system, but when you boil it down with regard to the Biden family, it's just flat out corruption. Your committee has revealed at least 20 shell corporations set up when Joe Biden became vice president. The reason you set up those corporations is to hide money. When Joe Biden was confronted about the latest allegations with regard to a $5 million bribe, his response was, "Where's the money?" I mean, doesn't take a crack investigator to see that there's something there, I think.
Well, listen, let's be really honest. These are the things we know for sure. 2019, Joe Biden said he built this firewall, and he said, I have no idea what Hunter Biden does business-wise, and I've never met any of his business associates. We know that to be a patent lie, dozens of times, if not scores of times over, number one. Number two, if you're conducting honest business and legitimate business, you don't need to set up 20 shell corporations. I don't know anybody that pockets seed money because they keep lying and they get caught in a lie and they make up another lie.
Yeah.
And by the way, what do the Bidens do? What service do they provide? What product do they sell? Even the Democrats can't tell us that because they thought they had a legitimate business and didn't know that they were just lying even to them.
Yeah.
So all these things, what do they smell like? And by the way, the 170 now suspicious activity reports, but wiring money through shell corporations. And then why did Joe Biden get referred to as the big guy by the the Ukrainian oligarch, but also by Americans that were doing business with Hunter Biden? The big guy clearly was Joe Biden. He was getting, a kickback.
Right. So we only got a minute left. I'm going to ask you a really naive question, but sorry, I feel like it has to be asked. If I get $5 million from a foreign entity to allow somebody to have access to an elected official, high-ranking elected official, if all I do is provide a meeting and they go and have a meeting with that elected official, is that legal? Can I do that?
I think it's a quid pro quo. If it's a direct quid pro quo, it's very illegal.
I thought so.
And that's what they've been doing, though. They sell an influence and access.
Yeah.
Period. End of story. Full stop. They lie and say they didn't, and then there are White House logs, and then there's photos of them in the Brady briefing room, and then there's a dinner because of Hunter Biden's laptop and his carelessness. There's a dinner over at Cafe Milano in 2015 with these associates.
Yeah.
If Joe Biden was legitimate, all he had to say in 2019 was, yeah, my son is in the energy sector and he is in the rare earth mineral sector, although he has no experience doing that, I suppose. But that's what he does, and I've occasionally met with some of his business associates, and I wish him the best.
Yeah.
He didn't do that. He always tried to cover. He always tried to obfuscate because they are crooked as the day is long.
Well, we live in a world where a congresswoman can sit on the floor and say Adam Schiff tells the truth, and so I don't know where we are right now. Really, and I do mean really fast. Can articles of impeachment come out of the Oversight Committee, or do they have to come from a special impeachment committee? I'm just asking for a friend.
Oh, no, I believe there's an article to jurisdiction. I think it can come from the Judiciary Committee. It could,
Judiciary.
Come from Oversight.
All
yeah,
right.
I think typically it's Judiciary. That's just the way they kind of want to handle it.
Can we get Jordan on here next? Thank you. Thank you, Congressman Fallon. Good to talk with you. We'll be back. More to come on O'Connor tonight. I recently watched Matt Walsh's documentary film, What is a Woman, for a second time. Now, I first watched it last year. I found it to be insightful, important, and enraging. Recently, the groundbreaking film was made available through Twitter outside of the Daily Wire's paywall, and nearly 200 million people have seen it. After viewing the film a second time, and I do greatly suggest you do that, it struck me just how very important the overarching civilizational issue the mere title of the film presents and exposes. Now, don't get me wrong. Seeing doctors and academics deny the basic reality of biological sex and chromosomal science is absolutely maddening. And seeing the victims of legal genital mutilation and chemical castration lament the way they were manipulated into curing their psychological conditions with surgical procedures that look like medieval torture was absolutely heartbreaking. But the most fundamental and basic societal challenges Western civilization faces today was exposed in the film's simple title, What is a Woman? The educated elites with multiple advanced degrees refused to even acknowledge the validity of the question, let alone attempt to answer it. It pulled back the curtain on the political and cultural left in our country. The desire to force a redefinition of the term woman into an undefined, subjective feeling exposes the very real and tyrannical danger this movement poses, beyond how it endangers our children and the safety of our wives, sisters, and daughters. The left demands that the millennia-old understanding of male and female distinctions be thrown out the window and replaced with, well, they can't tell you exactly what it's to be replaced with, just that what we've understood biologically and scientifically until about a half a minute ago is just downright bigoted and evil. That's tyranny. And the tyranny begins with the insistence on changing our language. She no longer means she. Man no longer means man. And if you use the correct word to properly and accurately describe an individual who has subjectively reimagined themselves as something other than the objective reality of their biological sex, well, you are to be reprimanded or culturally isolated, and if possible, outright destroyed. Each individual has their own revealed knowledge of what word and pronoun properly defines their identity, and you're not allowed to use your own observational skills, your own reason, or basic logic to articulate what your eyes and your brain tell you is reality. In fact, you'll be forced to inaccurately deceive yourself and all those around you with a lie to accommodate that individual's idiosyncratic demands, or else. Now that is the very definition of tyranny, and it's becoming mainstream. Now, beyond the totalitarian language demands, which are civilization destroying in their own right, the very understanding of biological reality must now be redefined, if not outright denied. The refusal of doctors, professors, and philosophers to even attempt to answer the film's titular question is enough to throw our civilization's forward advancements back several thousands of years. That's why Walsh's decision to visit a primitive tribe in undeveloped Africa to tackle the question your random PhD or Supreme Court justice refuses to answer reveals exactly how destructive this issue really is. The Maasai tribesman's delight in ridiculing the fundamental basic premise of the question tells you exactly what is on the verge of being undone if the intellectual left has its way. Redefining fundamental words and realigning basic scientific norms to conform to unfounded and whimsical new notions of reality have the same effect on our society that the misguided and well-funded surgeons have when mutilating perfect, healthy young bodies while providing so-called gender-affirming care. While the entire world is sitting around watching Bud Light's market share spiral into oblivion, we're not noticing that our civilization is doing the exact same nosedive. Yes, what is a woman is beyond important, it's essential. See it twice, and share it. Not just for what the film reveals, but for the tyrannical cultural decay its unanswered title portends. That's it for tonight. We'll see you again tomorrow, same time, same place. In the meantime, I'll see you on the radio.